Metsimaholo by-elections is political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. He joins us now from our Pretoria studios. Very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's now start with the SACP. Its General Secretary Bladen Zimande said at a news conference today the South African Communist Party had no faith in the ANC-led alliance and it's not rallying behind any ANC presidential hopeful. What do you make of that statement?
Well, it's certainly a change in their approach. Until very recently, they were quite clearly in support of Cyril Ramaphosa as the presidential candidate. I think what they possibly have in mind is that they don't want to repeat the mistake that they have made at Polokwane when they've supported President Zuma, and that we all know what happened since then, of how they, in their own mind, has miscalculated in that respect. And I think this is possibly what the SACP wants to do now, is to position themselves in a situation where they don't have to make a choice amongst the two main candidates.
Well, the SACP also said it will not help the ANC to govern Metsimaholo in the Free State. I mean, no party received an outright majority in this week's by-election. Is the alliance done?
I don't think the alliance is done. Although I've now said that they are not openly supporting Cyril Ramaphosa, behind the scenes, both COSATU and the Communist Party is still very much in support of Cyril Ramaphosa. So one can, in a sense, say that half of the ANC is supported by the alliance and the other half, that of President Zuma, is not supported by the alliance. And depending what's the outcome of the election at the National Conference, that will to a large extent determine the future and the cooperation within the alliance. I think we have to remind ourselves that the decision that was taken by the South African Communist Party to contest elections on their own, especially for 2019, they've sort of reserved their final decision on that until early next year. And it is clear that they first want to see what's the outcome of this ANC election before they will take their final decision about it.
Now, back to the ANC, how will that change under a new ANC leadership? Will it make a difference whether Cyril Ramaphosa wins or whether Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma takes over?
Well, I think that relationship with the alliance will very much be determined by who's going to be the victor at the national election or the national conference. Because as I've indicated at this stage, anyone associated with President Zuma is not seen as someone close to the Communist Party and COSATU. And therefore it will just be much easier for an alliance to move closer to a ANC leadership under Cyril Ramaphosa. But as we've seen really since 1996, when the ANC government announced GEAR as the macroeconomic policy, the relationship with the alliance partners, the COSATU and the Communist Party, has always been very unstable and sometimes very acrimonious also, even during the Mbeki period. So it's very difficult to really predict what is going to be the relationship of the alliance in the near future.
According to the tally so far that we've been receiving, with 7 provinces pronouncing on their preferred candidates, Cyril Ramaphosa is in the lead. On KZN, the biggest province, and Limpopo to hold their PGCs this week. How is that likely to change the picture?
I think what we are going to see once the 2 provinces have pronounced is most possibly a very close division between the 2 candidates. I have maintained for quite some time now that I think it's very difficult to predict what is the outcome going to be. The one uncertain factor is not necessarily those 2 provinces, but rather Mpumalanga, because of this notion of identifying the option of a unity candidate, and we don't know who's the unity candidate. And we've seen also with their nominations, or the results of their nominations, that in all cases, for all 6 positions, the so-called unity candidate has received the majority of the nominations. And because Mpumalanga is the province with the 2nd highest number of delegates, I think that's going to play a very important role. The strategy is not clear. Incidentally, today there was an article by Zwelem Kize in one of the Sunday newspapers, positioning himself very much on this ticket of the unity candidate idea. But I personally cannot see how it is going to work for at least for the election of the president of the ANC. Once that has been announced and they must elect for the other 5 positions in the top 6, then it might become possible to use this, especially if the results are very close. If it is almost a 50-50 division, then there might be a possibility to use this. But otherwise, at this stage, I'm not exactly sure how it is going to be used by the Premier of Mpumalanga. But that's certainly going to play an important role if the results of the presidential election is a very close one.
President Zuma's preferred presidential candidate or nominee in the person of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, if she doesn't make it for argument's sake in December, how vulnerable is President Zuma at this point, post-December, and would that mean that he would see the end of his term in 2019?
I think it does not depend so much on who's going to win of the 2 main candidates. I think either of them will possibly come to the conclusion that early in 2018, President Zuma won't be able to continue as national president. And for one particular reason, and that is that the ANC has lost significantly in the 2016 local government election. They've analyzed, done an internal assessment and identified that President Zuma as a person, as his presence, was very detrimental to the ANC. They have only a margin of about 4 or 5% in order to be able to maintain their 50% plus 1 majority. And with President Zuma, it became a very high-risk strategy. So I personally see it as highly unlikely that the ANC, from either side, is going to continue with President Zuma until 2019.
All right, let's talk about Dr. Makosi Khoza. She just launched her party yesterday. Some are saying that it's going to be a damp squib. What are your thoughts on this?
Unfortunately, I must agree with that for the moment at least. The party political scene in South Africa, the spectrum is very congested at the moment. There's not really very much space on the political spectrum for any new political party. And what we are also seeing is the emergence of the ANC still as the dominant party, but less dominant than in the past, and with the DA than the EFF, and even a revival by the IFP. And that sort of covers most of the political spectrum. And to have another party that can make a significant impact and find a niche for itself, I think is very unlikely or almost impossible. What she is trying to do is to bring together a number of small parties, like, for example, the Forum for Service Delivery, this Metsimaholo Community Association, and other small parties, plus persons who have defected or been kicked out of the EFF and other parties. So it's going to be exceptionally difficult, like all new parties, to first find an identity for itself, and then how to market it, how to sell it to the electorate. And I think she possibly will have not enough time. It's now about 18 months before the 2019 general election, and I don't think it will be enough to really establish the party with its own identity and with a niche for itself.
How will the emergence of a multiplicity of smaller parties impact on the outcome or the performance of the ANC?
I don't think it will make a major impact on the ANC. What we are seeing is, in any case, the emergence of coalition government, and it's likely that it's going to now move from the local government, and that's where the small parties have still some significance, to the provincial level, where small parties won't necessarily have the same impact. And therefore, what I've just mentioned there, I think there's a consolidation of the bigger parties like the DA, the EFF, and to some extent the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal, with the ANC also, and that any coalition will be formed mainly between those main parties. So we don't have anymore the situation of the late 90s and early 2000s, where there was one dominant party, the ANC, and the rest of the opposition was very fragmented. We have, in a sense, now a 2 or 3 party system that's emerging, and all other small parties together. If we look, for example, at the current the composition of small parties, they don't constitute more than 5% of the total votes that were cast in either 2014 or 2016.
Let's talk about the Metsimaholo municipality. Is one of the big stories that have been making headlines the past week. Some political thought leaders and analysts are suggesting that Metsimaholo is likely to go for a third round at the polls. Do you agree with that school of thought?
That's likely to happen, because what we are seeing is a composition not far different, much different from the one before this election, and that is that you will have almost a 50-50 split. And if there's not a clear majority of more than just 1 or 2 seats, then there's always the risk, and this is where the small parties come in, because there's 4 small parties with 1 seat each. And they can make a difference in who's going to be the majority coalition in Metsimaholo. And if just one of them then make a move, like what happened in the past when the one member, the mayor from the Metsimaholo Civic Community Association moved over to the ANC, then it really disturbed the whole coalition arrangement. And there is a likelihood that that can happen in future again.
All right, Professor Dirk Kotze, as always, it's an absolute pleasure chatting to you. We really appreciate your analysis and your insights. That was a political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, speaking to us live from our Pretoria studios, just giving us a roundup of the week that was in the political scene in the country. Let's take a short break now. Primetime News will be right back.